22. Room 205 was locked, and when I knocked on the door, no one answered. Unfortunately, the police had no grounds to check inside, and from what Fennel and I observed, the women weren't in any danger. They weren't even here. Moving down the corridor, I slid the card through the slot, but the light remained red. I double-checked the room number. Maybe I was losing my mind. I tried the card again. The light on the side turned green, and I pushed the door open. The room was dark, and I flipped on the light and nearly jumped out of my skin. I clutched my chest and slammed the door. "Well, it took you long enough. I thought you were just going to check their end of the hallway and call it quits," Brad said. Out of fear and paranoia, I realized I was holding my gun, so I shoved it back into my holster. "What the hell are you doing here? I thought you were camping out at the diner." "How many times do I have to say it? I go where you go." "Yeah, right." Fennel grinned. David's meeting ended, and after I drank an entire pot of coffee, the waitress was looking to get rid of me. "What's her name? I should invite her to join the club," I teased. "Be nice." He stared out the opening in the drapes. "After our excursion to the club tonight, it looks like our play might have changed. Feel like being bait to lure these assholes out?" "I'm not bait. I'm too old to be bait, as you so eloquently pointed out earlier." "Regardless, Grayson upped the surveillance since we called for a unit to sit on the club. Obviously something's going on around here. We just need to figure out what." "Yeah, I know. So what's the new plan?" "It's now 3 teams split between 2 rooms. You'll come and go, but the other 2 teams will trade out. If you find a way to get in with the women, do it. That's why we're here to watch your back." "Great. What room are you in?" "This one." "Brad," I warned. "I'm staying here. No one will ever see me. I'll use the adjoining room to go in and out. Just don't invite anyone back here without giving me the heads up first, and we'll be fine." "How did you get inside my motel room? The desk clerk knows you're a cop. You announced the other night." "You mean last night?" "That was yesterday? After what happened at the house, it feels like weeks ago." "Tell me about it." "Did you badge the desk clerk to get in here?" "I'm not some newbie boot. I wouldn't jeopardize your cover by doing that. The last thing we need is to tip off the staff. Mac made the reservations online for 2 last-minute businessmen. Loyola and Sullivan showed up to check in, and Loyola slipped me the key card for 202. I opened the adjoining door and peered inside. The other door was open, but the room was dark. "Where is he?" "Downstairs in 122. The motel had a last-minute checkout." "Did you learn anything at the diner?" Fennel worked his jaw. "David and his group finished up 20 minutes ago. I tailed him back to the community center. He should be in the middle of hosting another AA meeting. I didn't go in since I wasn't exactly invited back." "I hate this." I moved closer to the window and peered out the corner where the drape remained open. "Did the uniforms question the guests? Did any of them recognize Claudia Arroyo?" "It's a motel. People come and go. I don't know if they got to everyone." With a new plan formulating, I dialed the station. We didn't know much about Claudia, but whatever we could find, I'd be able to use. When I checked in, my cover was just a name on a credit card. Now it was time to develop my backstory, and I had some ideas. My thoughts drifted to Lila. No wonder she wanted to be an actress. She could reinvent herself whenever she wanted. The squawk of the radio drew me from my internal analysis, and I looked up from the computer screen. Fennel remained perched at the window. "Yeah, I got them," he replied. "Any issues?" "None," came the disembodied voice. "Same head count you gave us." "All right. Thanks for the assist." Brad put the radio back on the table and moved to the side of the window, peering out as inconspicuously as possible. "The women are back." "Now's my chance." I left the laptop on the bed and grabbed the ice bucket. Go hide in your own room. Fennel saluted as I tucked the keycard in my pocket and went out the door. I went past 205, stopping at the alcove to fill the bucket with ice. While I listened to the whir of the machine, one of the blonde women ran down the hallway. She took the stairs down, and I peered over the railing. She stopped outside the room where I'd encountered the crying woman on my first visit. She knocked, but no one answered. Slowly, she trudged up the steps, muttering curses. Taking the full bucket, I stepped directly into her path. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "No," she mumbled. "I'm Liv. Is there anything I can do to help?" She studied me, wondering if she should trust a total stranger. "Shanna. Nice to meet you." I stood in the middle of the walkway, blocking her path back to her room. "What's wrong?" After what felt like an eternity, she finally said, "They took her." The hairs at the back of my neck prickled, and I fought to keep my expression neutral. "Took who?" "It doesn't matter." She tried to push past me, but I held my ground. "Leave me alone." "I just want to help. You look upset. What happened?" "It's not your business." I squinted. "You have an accent. What is that, German?" "Czech." "It's lovely." She rolled her eyes and scoffed. "Ugh, are you hitting on me? I had plenty of men do that in the club. I didn't want any of them, and I don't want you. I'm not here to socialize." "Why are you here?" "Work." "Me too. Modeling, right?" Her eyes grew wider, confused why a complete stranger insisted on speaking to her. "Yes." "Thought so. Rogers and Stein?" Recognition dawned on her. "You were in the lobby asking about them." "Yeah." "Is that where you work?" I chose my words carefully. "I can see why you'd think so." She analyzed every inch of me. "Talent scout or agent?" "What's the difference?" She glared at me and poked at the ice bucket I held in front of my chest. "You took her. You're the reason she's gone. This is your fault." "Took who?" I repeated. "A friend of mine. According to Dmitri, another agency recruited her, and that's why she left us. That's what keeps happening. Over and over. We all came here together. We were supposed to stay together, get chosen together. But no." Anger burned in her eyes. "What's your friend's name?" "Ingrid." "When did she get recruited?" I asked. "Last week." "May I speak to Dmitri?" "Why? Planning on recruiting someone else?" I saw the jealousy in her eyes. This wasn't concern over her friend's safety. This was animosity for not being chosen. Shanna had no idea how fortunate she was. I had to say something to keep her talking. "Plenty of local modeling agencies have a vast array of openings. I'm not sure how many of you are here, but we have spots to fill. And you'd be perfect." For the first time since we met, Shanna smiled. "Really?" "Yes. You can talk to Ivan since Dmitri's not here. He left on business. He should be back in a few days." I wasn't going to tell her he wasn't coming back. "Why don't you come to my room so we can discuss this?" Before she could answer, the door behind me opened, and a man I recognized as the van driver stepped out of the room. "Shanna, get inside." I turned, smiling brightly. "Hi, I'm Liv." "I don't give a fuck who you are." "Ivan, she's with Rogers and Stein," Shanna said. The name meant nothing to him, and I knew this wasn't about modeling. My mind raced, contemplating arguments for exigent circumstances, but I couldn't come up with any. From what little I could see of the room, there were no drugs, no alcohol, and no crimes being committed, even though my instinct said the entire situation was one giant crime in progress. "Shanna, you don't have to do what he says. We can talk." "Later. I have to go." She waltzed past me and into the room. He sneered, giving me the once-over before slamming the door. I returned to my room and told Fennel everything. With this new information, We needed 24-hour mobile surveillance with multiple units. And with Ivan, the new player on the field, we had even more to investigate. We wouldn't be able to keep this from the feds for long. Boop. 23. I don't trust Jaden Miller. Fennel pinned his picture to our board. The motel clerk? Brad nodded. There's something about him. He never answered any of our questions. He refuses to cooperate. He doesn't want to be helpful. You should be used to that by now, Detective, Captain Grayson said. I'm telling you, Cap, he's in on it. He knows what's going on inside. And given the room key we found on Claudia Arroyo's body, the mention of Dimitri, and young women who fit the victimology, taking up at least 2 different suites inside the motel, I don't see what more we need to conduct a raid. Ask Winters, I mumbled. The district attorney's office denied my request, and we got into it over the potential ramifications. Needless to say, at the moment, I was their least favorite detective. Have you found Ivan yet? Grayson asked. No. I pushed away from the desk. He's not in any of the files Agent Peters brought over. The surveillance team snapped a few shots when they went to the club, but Ivan isn't in any of the databases as far as I can tell. And neither are the women. Do you believe Shanna's in immediate danger? Grayson asked. I think they all are. But unless Ivan steps out of line or one of the women comes forward, our hands are tied. I stared at the photographs taped to the board. We already had 8 victims. 2 were dead. 1 remained critical. And 5 were still unaccounted for. We have to stop this. I don't care about making a case. I care about saving them. Liv? Brad said softly, but one sharp look stopped him from saying more. We have teams at the ready. Nothing will happen to any of the women at the motel, Grayson vowed. So don't worry about them. Do what you need to do. After the captain returned to his office, I checked the time. I spent all night waiting and hoping Shanna or one of the others would leave the room, but no one did. Around 8 this morning, I heard movement in the corridor. Several people went into the lobby to grab the meager breakfast offerings, but Ivan and the women never came down for breakfast. At 10, I gave up and returned to the station. Why didn't I ask Shanna for Dimitri's last name? If I had, we'd have enough for a warrant. God! I slammed my desk drawer. Why am I so stupid? She probably wouldn't have told you. And even if she did, who's to say he gave the women his real name? From what Martha told us, these men are careful. Mr. X. Fennel gave me a pointed look. It could be Ivan. We can play this game all day, but it's not helping. I grabbed a stack of photos off the desk. I'm going to retrace our steps in case we miss something. I slipped into my jacket and grabbed my keys. I don't know what else to do. I'll go back to the house, Brad volunteered. I know CSU's analyzed everything, but since our teams found a few hidden rooms, it won't hurt to check again. Be careful. I forced the shiver away, thinking about the sniper and how close we had been to catching him. For a moment, I wondered if Ivan or Oleg had been behind the scope. We barely glimpsed the man before he got into the car and vanished. And with a mask pulled over his face, it had been impossible to determine anything about him. My first stop was to see Nikki. She was even more panicked now, with the constant news coverage concerning Clarissa Behrens' abduction. After reassuring her that we were doing our best to find Abigail, I asked about the other missing women. I showed Nikki photos of all 8 of our victims, but she didn't recognize any of them. Did Abigail ever mention the monthly stay condos? Nikki froze, a deer caught in headlights. Finally, she blinked. What? The monthly stay condos? Does that ring a bell? Based on her reaction, I knew it did. Yeah. She nodded several times. She used to stay there. We didn't see a charge on her credit card. I don't know. Maybe she paid cash. Did she have that much cash? Nikki shrugged. A lot of babysitting and dog walking gigs pay cash. Food delivery tends to pay cash too. Abby always had a stack of bills on her. It was easier for her to keep up with how much she had since her income was so unstable. Did Abigail ever mention anyone named Dmitri, Oleg, or Ivan? Not that I recall. I flipped through the photos I brought with me, but I didn't think to grab anything from the FBI files. Would you mind coming to the precinct to answer a few more questions? This is important, isn't it? It is, I assured her. Okay. Nikki checked the time. I just have to find someone to cover for me. Can you wait a few minutes? That's fine. Nikki grabbed her phone off the charger and dialed a number. While she did that, I stared out her kitchen window. She lived in a studio apartment that was smaller than the condo at the motel. From things she had said in the past, I knew her biggest regret was not offering to let Abigail room with her. She felt responsible for not helping her friend out. Maybe if Abigail hadn't been so strapped for cash, she wouldn't have crossed paths with Keith Richardson. After a brief conversation with a coworker, she hung up and turned to me. Do you think Abby's still alive? The news said the first 24 hours are crucial in recoveries. Don't believe everything you hear on TV. She smiled sadly. You didn't answer the question, Detective DeMarco. I don't know, but I promise I won't stop looking for her. She eyed me for a long time. Every cop I've spoken to about Abby has said the same thing, but you're the first one I believe. You and your partner. Her brow furrowed. Franklin? Fennel. Right, sorry. She gestured for me to go first and stopped outside to lock her deadbolt. Can't be too careful in this neighborhood. Or anywhere. And to think I used to tell Abby she was too cautious. She followed me to the car and fastened her seatbelt. It probably should have been me. Why do you say that? She shrugged. I used to be wild. Crazy dorm parties. All-night ragers. Going to clubs. Hooking up with strangers. You know, all the things your parents tell you never to do. When I met Abigail, she never wanted to go out. I used to have to drag her to bars. I always told her to live a little. I remained silent the rest of the ride, letting Nikki ramble. I hoped she'd say something that would prove useful. She'd been interviewed several times since she filed the initial missing persons report, but she never mentioned the monthly stay condos. So it was possible she had other important information she failed to divulge. By the time we arrived at the station, I had a lengthy list of questions to ask. I let her settle onto the couch in the break room, figuring that would make her feel more comfortable and encourage her to be open and honest. I asked an officer to keep an eye on her while I went to my desk to grab some files. DeMarco! Grayson stepped out of his office. What are you still doing here? I just got back. You're done already? The question didn't make sense. What are you talking about, sir? The hospital called. Dimitri's awake. Agent Peters is on his way. He was supposed to call you. Shit. I resisted the urge to race out of the bullpen. I just brought Nikki in to answer some more questions. She said Abigail Booker stayed at the monthly stay condos. My thoughts splintered. Hey, Mac, do you have a minute? I looked back at the captain. I'll take care of it, sir. Mac stopped typing and arched an eyebrow at me. What do you need? I gave her a quick rundown of everything that happened. Normally, I'd ask Loyola or Sullivan to fill in, but they were sitting on the motel. And the rest of our unit was busy running down other leads. Plus, Mac was the friendliest face around. I briefed her on what was happening, scribbled down a list of questions, grabbed a hold of the closest uniform, and led them both to the break room. After a rushed introduction and apology, I raced to the hospital. I didn't know how long Dmitri would be conscious, but he had answers, and I was determined to get them out of him. 24. DeMarco. Agent Peters nodded in my direction. I wasn't sure if you would make it. Might have helped if you called. The FBI agent remained straight-faced. He's not talking. He's pretending he doesn't speak English. A translator is on the way. You think that'll make a difference? I asked. No. I watched a woman in a lab coat show her identification to the officer outside Dimitri's door before she entered the room, checked his vitals, pushed a button on a monitor, and exited. How's he doing? I asked. He's stable for now. The swelling in his brain decreased, so we brought him out of the coma. What about brain damage? That's a strong possibility. It's too soon to say to what extent, she said. Thanks. I watched as she disappeared down the hallway. Translator or not, it might not make any difference. He could be a vegetable. Peters stared into the room. He's faking. Where'd you get your medical degree? The FBI agent chuckled. You'll see. After the translator arrived, we entered Dimitri's room. Despite the bandages and tubes, the bastard still had a spark in his eye. He thought he was playing us. For the next hour, I went hard at Dmitri, but he wouldn't answer any questions. He wouldn't even acknowledge the translator. I never wanted to beat a confession out of someone before, and now it took every ounce of self-restraint to keep my hands off of him. I cursed at him, and an amused glint ignited in his eyes. He understood what I said, and he was enjoying this. You son of a bitch! I lunged, and Peters pulled me away before I could inflict any real damage. DeMarco, take a walk. I want him too, but not like this. I'll take it from here. I'll get him to talk. Peters jerked his chin toward the door. I stepped out of the room and trudged down the hospital corridor. Losing it wasn't an option, especially in front of an FBI agent. Captain Grayson would have my ass for this, but I couldn't worry about that now. Liv? Emma asked, surprised to see me. What are you doing here? I looked up, not realizing I wandered from the ICU to the ER. Just questioning a suspect. I leaned against the counter at the nurse's station. Do you think you can tell me how Martha's doing? Martha? Em started to type. Martha Evans. We brought her in 2 days ago. Gunshot wound to the abdomen. Emma clicked a few more keys. It's still touch and go. Can I see her? Please. Em looked around and gave me her room number. You didn't get that from me. I pretended to zip my lip and wandered back the way I came. Hospital staff typically didn't care about badges. Their priority was treating patients, but since one of their patients was under police protection and the other was under arrest, they allowed me to slip inside without too much fuss. Taking a seat beside Martha's bed, I glanced at the monitors. Her numbers looked decent. I took her hand and gave it a squeeze. I'm sorry this happened. I'm sorry we didn't get to you in time. Closing my eyes, I silently willed her to live. Like Fennel always said, we promised not to lose anyone else. Although, no matter how much he wanted that to be true, in this job, it never was. The officer stationed outside her room stepped into the doorway. Detective, you should get going. The nurse is making the rounds. I released Martha's hand, and she let out a wheeze. Wait. I clutched her hand again. I'm here. It's Liv. Her eyes fluttered, but they didn't stay open. The officer remained frozen in the doorway. Liv? I'm with the police. I was with you in the house. Remember? She squeezed my hand tighter. The others? Where are they? I asked. Her eyes closed. Martha, hey, Claudia had a motel key card. Can you tell me about that? Were you there? What room? 107, she whispered, her voice fading as she blinked back out. Martha? I squeezed her hand, but it was no use. She said 107, the officer said. I'm so glad you heard that. I looked down at her. Thank you, Martha. As I was exiting, the nurse came down the hallway. What do you think you're doing? No one in or out. I'm sorry. What's your name? The nurse stared at my badge. I'll be filing a complaint. Yeah, you do that. I reached for my phone. Before I could call in a request for a search warrant, a rush of footfalls came from behind me. I pressed against the wall as half a dozen hospital personnel raced past. When I saw where they were headed, I cursed and ran after them. What the hell happened? I asked as Peters was pushed out of the room. I don't know. He had this smug look on his face and then it was lights out. Peters put his hands on his hips and stared through the open doorway, while the doctors unsuccessfully attempted to resuscitate Dmitry Barkov. After they called his time of death, I stepped away. The tiniest bit of doubt ran through my mind. Did Peters do something to Dmitry? I looked around. Where's the translator? Peters looked dumbfounded. I don't know. I took a step back. This is your mess to clean up. Fix it. Without waiting, I marched out of the hospital. Martha gave us enough to search the motel. We were going to end this today. No one else was going to die. 25. He waited until the hospital alarm sounded before walking away. He should have taken the initiative earlier. He shouldn't have sourced out the work to Keith and the others. But he learned his lesson. From now on, he'd do things himself. He never wanted to get his hands dirty, but he found that he was rather enjoying being in control. After the detective left the hospital, the coast was clear. He ducked out a side entrance and reached for his phone. Dmitry's dead. He died from complications. The police are to blame. Make sure your boss knows that. Oleg didn't respond. Instead, he stared into the cages, trying to decide which woman he'd like to sample. I'll be leaving after the auction. Ivan's making the arrangements. What about the girls at the motel? They are your problem. You found them. You brought them here. You deal with them. He thought about the stack of visas and passports he had in a safe deposit box. Most of the women in the stable had come from overseas. When they crossed paths with him, he made them his prisoners by taking their papers. They couldn't leave, and they couldn't get other work. They depended entirely on him and the false promises he made. And the local girls who'd willingly signed on the dotted line wouldn't leave because what he offered was far better than what they had before he took them in. The few who did pose problems, like the college student and Clarissa Behrens, were caged. He'd unload the troublemakers tonight, and if they didn't sell, he'd eliminate them. Who's with the girls at the motel? He asked. No one. How many made it to the auction site? Oleg glanced into the cages. 6. There should have been 8. One remained at the hospital, but she was under police protection. No one was allowed in or out without being on the list. He glanced back at the hospital entrance. It wasn't worth the risk. The entertainment should arrive soon. I hired an escort service who has agreed to cater in every sense of the word. Make sure security is tight. We don't want any uninvited guests crashing the party. Oleg reached into one of the cages and brushed his fingers against the girl's hair. She jerked away, sneering at him. Hanging up, he called the airlines and made 2 reservations. The Russian was right. Things were too hot. He and his wife needed to go on an extended vacation until things cooled off. They'd leave in the morning with whatever cash he made tonight. "Keep an eye on him," I insisted, nodding toward the desk clerk, who adamantly opposed the warrant, but a court order trumped any protest he might have. 2 uniforms remained in the lobby while Miller phoned his boss. Fennel doesn't trust him. I watched officers corral the 6 women from room 107 into a secluded portion of the parking lot. Until we concluded the search, they weren't going anywhere. As of yet, not a single one provided an ID. I looked around, but I didn't spot any sinister-looking men. Wouldn't the women have been kept under lock and key if they were part of a human trafficking ring? Huddled next to a cruiser stood the crying woman I encountered on my first trip to the motel. At least she hadn't been taken and had stopped crying, but now she looked terrified. She was white as a sheet, her eyes darting to and fro as she trembled slightly. 2 of her friends flanked her, running their hands up and down her arms in an attempt to comfort and warm her. I moved closer to the group. Luckily, no one recognized me beneath the tactical gear and face mask. I didn't want to risk being spotted since we only had access to the one room. "Is she okay?" I asked the officer guarding the group. He shrugged, and I let out a huff. "Just keep an eye out. Something has her spooked." Several guests stepped out of their rooms to see what was happening. I spotted Shanna and a few of the other alleged models. "Hey," I whispered to the closest officer. "Go upstairs and ask for IDs. I have it on good authority they might be here without the proper documentation." "You realize this is a sanctuary city, right?" "I'm not telling you to call ICE or even that they're illegal. I'm just asking you to get some facts straight. If a crime is being committed, it's your duty to stop it." This was a fine line. "And watch out for a guy named Ivan. We need to bring him in. Find a reason." The officer nodded and went up the steps to join the others, who were doing their best to herd the onlookers back into their rooms while we conducted the raid. Fennel pulled to a stop and got out of the car. I waved him over, and he did a double take. "Liv?" "Yep." "Nice look." As soon as we got the all clear, Brad and I entered Suite 107. The 2 double beds were unmade, and the pull-out remained open. A few suitcases and backpacks lined the corner of the room. Although technically the room could hold 6, it was a tight fit. "I'll start over here." I entered the bathroom, regretting my decision. The counter wasn't even visible beneath all the products. Rolling the mask up so I could see better and breathe, I started in one corner. We needed proof Martha or Claudia had been in this room. The officers outside were taking statements, asking the women questions and showing them photographs. We were close. We just needed a little cooperation, but from what I'd seen, the women were more afraid of us than whoever was responsible for the disappearances and murders. After finishing in the bathroom, I stepped into the bedroom area and opened the closet door. "More bags." "And to think they packed light," Brad teased from the other room. I crouched down and unzipped the first bag. It contained nothing but the essentials. I checked for luggage tags and IDs but came up empty. I tossed it to the side and pulled out the next bag. And then the next. I just finished checking the third bag when I spotted a rolling suitcase. I pulled it out, finding it locked. The search warrant covered everything in the room. The lock didn't mean a thing. I made fast work with the bolt cutters and unzipped the suitcase. I reached for the first leather case and lifted it out of the bag. Flipping it open, I stared down at a perfect replica of an FBI badge and photo credentials. "I got something," I called. Fennel entered the room a second later, and I held up the fake badge. He took it in his gloved hand and flipped to the photo. "Laurel, or should I say, Oleg Vorshkovich? And here's Hardy, a.k.a. Dmitry Barkov." I held up a second ID. Digging deeper in the bag, I found an array of uniforms, more fake credentials, and additional props. What do you make of this? I held up a pair of scrubs and a lab coat. Check the tag in the neck. Brad put the fake FBI badges down and examined the articles of clothing. Property of Breckenridge Community Theater. His eyes narrowed. That's the same theater house where Lila performed. This isn't a coincidence. I riffled through the bag, finding more props and costumes. With a solid lead and an obvious connection, the officers placed the 6 women under arrest. They were loaded into the backs of 3 cruisers and taken to the station. At least they'd be safe there. Fennel and I continued to search the room for additional evidence and items of interest. Berlin? That was the snow globe we found next to Jane Doe. He held up a cloth bag. Stitched to the front was a patch that read Berlin. He emptied the bag and pulled out a wallet. No ID. But there was a photo inside. He took it out, and sadness and anger flashed across his face. What is it? Family photo, maybe? I took the picture from him and looked at it. Jane Doe and a woman who looked like an older, heavier version smiled brightly at the camera. Jane Doe wore a pink leotard and matching wrap sweater, and the woman I assumed to be her mother held a bouquet of roses. She was a dancer. I flipped the photo over, but there was nothing written on the back. From the creases and frayed edges, I knew the photo had been carried a long time. Maybe Mac can pull something useful from the background. Yeah, maybe. Fennel didn't sound convinced. But that proves it. Jane Doe was here. The bastards who took her and probably killed her were here. He peered out the window, but the women had already been taken away. One of them knows what happened. They weren't the only ones here. Martha and Claudia must have stayed here at some point. Brad finished examining the last suitcase and ripped off his gloves. Stuffing them into his pocket, he stormed out of the room and straight to the motel office. An officer stepped inside the suite to assist, and I told him we were finished and CSU would need to process everything. Then I slid my mask over my face and went outside, hoping my partner wasn't doing something stupid enough to get himself suspended. Detective. An officer stopped me before I could follow Brad. You were right. The women upstairs in 205 didn't have any IDs. Some have accents. I asked about their passports, but they couldn't supply them. However, since they have open bottles of liquor and can't prove they aren't minors, we can take them in until we determine their ages. It's not much, but... What about Ivan? He shook his head. No men around. Fine, take them in. After we determine who they are, we'll be back to serve a second warrant. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Fennel slam his palm against the counter. I have to go. I dashed across the parking lot and into the office. How do I know you aren't responsible? Fennel asked. The names you have on file are bogus, and you refuse to cooperate. We've already found 2 women dead. A third's in the hospital. That's 3 strikes right there. And that doesn't even take into account the kidnapping charges. And I'm just getting started. I'll give you a second to think about your answer. Maybe you happen to remember something. Brad waited. I remained near the door, doing my best to look menacing, which was a much easier feat while dressed head to toe in tactical gear. The desk clerk looked at me, then at the glass door on the other side of the office. He was going to run. Do it, and I'll add fleeing the scene and resisting arrest to the growing list. Brad gave him a daring grin. Fine. The clerk spun the ancient CRT monitor around and placed the mouse on the upper portion of the counter. These are our records. Look all you want. Like I said, I don't know who rented the room. It says full occupancy. Those are the charges. That's all I know. I doubt that. Fennel printed the entire guest registry anyway. We had everything. Names, corporations, vehicles, number of guests, and charges. I took the stack of pages and skimmed them, but it was the same information we received when serving the initial court order. "What about your off-the-books visitors?" Miller reached beneath the counter and pulled out a thick yellow book. He slapped Brad across the face with it and bolted for the side door. Brad caught him and threw him on the ground before he even made it out of the lobby. I picked up the phone book from the floor. "You realize cops have a reputation for beating uncooperative suspects with phone books? Are you trying to give us tips on how to do our job?" I quipped. The clerk glared as Brad cuffed him. "Bite me, bitch." Brad and I exchanged a look. Before we even got our suspect out of the office, a few of the maids came to see what was happening. I questioned them while Brad passed the clerk off to another officer. At this rate, we might run out of police cars. 26. After everything we found and the clerk's outburst, we shut down the motel. The guests were asked to vacate temporarily, and additional court orders were already in the works. The precinct was abuzz with activity. Our holding cells were at max capacity, and every interrogation room was occupied. Officers were stationed outside every room. The women thought we were out to get them. They didn't realize we were protecting them. "They don't know what's going on," I said. "Shanna thinks they're being selected for jobs, and the others disappeared because they got their big break." "Come on." Fennel nudged me toward the car. "We have to move. As soon as the men responsible return to the motel, they'll realize they've been made. We have to act fast. We need actionable intel, and right now, our best lead is the community theater." "Community theater? Community center?" I let out a displeased growl. These are supposed to be safe places, not fronts for human trafficking." I palmed my keys and climbed into my car. Brad tapped the side before getting into his own cruiser. A few minutes later, I parked in the loading zone behind the building. 2 vans had their hazards on. I spotted David Hennon unloading something from one of the vans. I stepped out of my car just as Brad parked at a diagonal, preventing the 2 vans from leaving. "Mr. Hennon," I called, holding up my badge. "I need a moment of your time." He put the heavy box down and dusted off his hands. "What can I do for you, officer?" "Detective DeMarco," I corrected. "Mind lending me a hand, detective?" he asked, lifting the box. "I do." Hennon ignored me and continued into the building. Fennel checked the vehicle, and I cautiously followed Hennon inside, insisting that he stop, put down the box, and turn around slowly. After an inevitable protest, he sighed and obeyed my commands. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Making a delivery. Some kids in the after-school program help with set design." He opened the box, revealing art supplies. "Do you make this run often?" "Whenever we receive donations." Hennon looked behind me as my partner entered the building. "This is harassment, bordering on stalking. The 2 of you are violating my civil rights. I want to speak to your supervisor." "David Hennon, you're under arrest," Fennel said, surprising me with that statement. "You'll be able to speak to our captain after you're booked. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." "On what grounds?" Hennon challenged. Brad held a glove in his hand, the latex edges wrapping around a student ID. Lila James's student ID. "This was in the back of your van." Hennon stared at it, but he didn't move. Fennel closed the distance between them in moments, spun Hennon around, and cuffed him. He led him out of the building, reading him his rights on the way to the car. Once Hennon was secure in the back, Brad turned to me. I stared at the open doors on the van. "It was in plain sight. Right there." Fennel pointed. "I already radioed it in. We'll impound the vehicle." He glanced at the second vacant van. "I didn't see anything damning inside that one, but CSU might. Where's the driver?" I spotted Jesse, the man I met in AA. taking a smoke break at the side of the building. I got him. I headed toward the side of the theater. Take Hennon in and get us some damn answers. But as usual, my partner wouldn't leave me without backup. He remained outside the car, prepared to intercede should the situation require it. Hopefully, Jesse wouldn't be a problem. "Jesse?" I called, approaching slowly from the side. My hand automatically rested on the handle of my gun. "Hey, I know you." He smiled. "Liza? Lydia? Liv." I held up my badge. "Detective Liv DeMarco." "No wonder you gave me the 3rd degree." He chuckled. "Be honest. Do you even have a drinking problem?" "No, but I have a very big problem, and I hope you can help me with it." He snubbed the cigarette out against the brick wall. "Sure. How can I help?" "Is that your van?" I pointed. "Did you drive it here?" "I drove it, but it's not mine. It belongs to the community center. David asked me to help out." "To do what, exactly?" Jesse told me the same thing Hennon did regarding their trip to the community theater. While he was speaking, a patrol pulled up. I waved Brad off. Jesse watched the exchange uncertainly. "What's going on?" I didn't trust him. He could be an accomplice. "Would you mind showing me the van and the supplies you're delivering?" "Sure, no problem." I waited for him to go first, keeping a close eye on him in case he presented as a threat or decided to bolt. A cursory examination of the second vehicle didn't turn up any evidence that Lila or any of the other missing women had been inside. Jesse opened the boxes, and I used the tip of a pen to pick through the contents, finding nothing but paints and brushes. 2 tow trucks arrived, and the vans were sealed and loaded onto the beds. "Where are the boxes you already unloaded?" I asked. "Inside. Let me show you." Jesse headed for the door, and I followed him. An officer remained near the theater's rear exit. "In here." Jesse flipped a light and pointed to a backstage storage room. We put them right there. They contained more of the same. "Jesse, I need you to come to the station and answer some questions. As long as you cooperate, you won't be in any trouble." That last part might have been a lie, depending on the things he said, but it wouldn't help to run through worst-case scenarios now. The last thing I needed was a possible witness or lead to lawyer up. He looked down at his watch. "When?" "Now." "I actually have to go to work now." "I'm sorry, this can't wait. We'll get you in and out as quickly as possible, I promise." He thought for a moment. "What is this about?" Before I could answer, I heard a squeal come from the corridor. I poked my head out of the room and saw a gray-haired woman roll a rack of dresses down the hall. One of the wheels let out another shriek, and I cringed. "Excuse me," I called. She jumped, startled. "I'm with the police. Who are you, and what are you doing?" She looked at me as if the questions didn't compute. "I'm Gwen. I work here." "What are those?" I asked, pointing to the rack. "Costume donations." She stepped closer, spotting Jesse lingering in the doorway behind me. "Hi, Jesse. Bring us anything good today?" "Just more painting supplies for the kids' theater group." Hearing our voices, the officer entered the building to see if everything was okay. "Detective?" "Did they finish outside?" I asked, and the officer nodded. "Do me a favor and take Jesse down to the station. Tell Grayson he might have important information. Fennel has the details. We want to get him in and out as quickly as possible." "Ma'am?" "Go," I insisted. I turned to Jesse. "I don't want to hold you up longer than necessary. Go with the officer. When you're finished, someone will give you a ride to work or wherever you want to go." He held up his palms. "Yeah, okay, whatever." The woman watched the exchange, her jaw hanging open. When the 2 men were gone, she found her words. "Can I see your badge?" "Sure." I unclipped it and held it out to her. She examined it closely. It's heavier than I thought. The props we use around here are a lot lighter. They're nothing but tin. This has a nice heft. What can you tell me about Lila James? I asked. Understanding registered on her face. Oh, you still haven't found her? When no one else came by to ask questions, I just thought, maybe she'd been found. Not yet, ma'am. I'm following up on some leads. What can you tell me about these donations you received? Did you ever notice anything suspicious about them, or the people who brought them? No. What about David Hennon? David's a gem. He does a good job getting the word out and collecting materials. He always sends someone over from the community center to bring us the deliveries, even though we have our own pickup guys. I'd seen the theater's records before. Missing Persons had collected them and checked all the employees and volunteers when they were investigating Lila's disappearance. But Lila's ID ended up in the back of that van somehow. Did Lila ever make a delivery? Jessie said she hung up posters inside the community center. She might have. She loves theater. A real thespian. The woman smiled. I already showed the other cops the dressing rooms and prep areas, but you're welcome to look around if you think it might help. I doubted it, and I didn't want to waste too much time. That's okay, unless Lila had a locker or cubbyhole where she kept things. We don't have any designated spaces, but I'll show you the spot in the changing area Lila used. Unfortunately, nothing she said explained how Lila's ID ended up in the back of the van. I was fairly certain it was because Lila had been in the back of that van, probably when she was abducted. But unless CSU found blood in the back, the evidence remained flimsy. A shiny dress hung from the peg on the wall where Lila hid behind a paper screen to change. Did she wear this? Yes, for the dance number at the end. Kind of high-end for community theater, isn't it? I examined the designer label, but it wasn't a knockoff. More donations. I believe that piece came from Rogers and Stein. They were having a charity auction, and David convinced them to donate a lot of their old pieces and office materials that didn't sell. A lot of our costumes and equipment we use on stage, lighting, cameras, even the curtains, came from Rogers and Stein. They just renovated and got rid of everything. She opened the closet door, pointing to feather boas, dozens of masks, and various other props. Can you believe they had all this just lying around from past photo shoots? Their renovation has been great for us. What about these? I showed her photographs of the costumes and badges I found in the motel room. Where did they come from? I can't be sure. We do take other donations, and we also have a budget we use to purchase whatever we need. It isn't much, which is why donations are so appreciated. She narrowed her eyes at the badges. As far as I know, we've never used props like that in any of our productions. We normally use these. She showed me an array of shiny tin stars. They might not be authentic, but they're visible to the audience. Those would be too small. Yeah. I glanced back at the shiny dress. Rogers and Stein, I repeated. By any chance, do you remember who exactly made the donation? She shook her head. I would guess someone in PR. That's what I was thinking. 27. You again? The bitchy receptionist from last time rolled his eyes. What do you want now? I need to speak to whoever's in charge of donations. Donations? He tapped a few keys, muttering under his breath, You look like a charity case. With a fake smile, he added, Mr. Stein authorizes all our charitable contributions, but he's in the London office this week. You'll have to come back. Okay, then I'll need to speak to whoever's in charge of these renovations. Honey, it's 5 o'clock. Everyone who's anyone has already left for the night. So that's why you're still here? Meow, he replied. I leaned closer. Look, you're a smart guy. Surely you have your finger on the pulse of this place. You must know everything that goes on around here. He raised an intrigued eyebrow. Maybe. Young women have been disappearing lately. One of them was found dead right outside this building. Seriously? His ears perked up. Yes. I removed my phone from my pocket and scrolled to the proper photos. Do you recognize any of these people? He flipped through the images, shaking his head. They don't work here. What about his temps? I don't exactly mingle with the temps. Of course not, I thought miserably. That would be beneath you. Models? Or model wannabes? He snorted. We get plenty of those. They're a dime a dozen. I definitely wouldn't remember any of them. This was getting me nowhere. Is Mr. Crenshaw here? No, he's been out sick the last 2 days. Do you know anything about the donations made to the community theater? Sorry. He pointed to the clock over my head. Time's up. If you'd like to make an appointment to speak with someone, call back in the morning. Frustrated, I handed him my card. If you remember anything, give me a call. I'll make it worth your while. I doubt you could. And this game is tired and boring, kind of like you. Before leaving the building, I spoke to the woman in the lobby. She'd been helpful enough to photocopy the office directory for Brad, and today she handed me the sign-in sheet. At least I had a list of deliveries and pickups. But tracking down each service and driver and asking questions would take forever. However, as my dad always said, police work required patience and perseverance. Stick with it, Olive. You got this. I returned to the car and flipped through the pages, dialing numbers and asking questions as I went. By the time I looked up, it was dark out. My phone beeped and I checked my messages. Mac left a text. Nikki hadn't been able to provide any useful information. Fennel hadn't called, which meant Hennon hadn't said a word. I sent my partner a message and asked about Jessie, but that turned out to be another dead end. Now that we had the women from the motel, the human traffickers would scatter, and whatever cargo they still possessed, they'd have to liquidate immediately. Units had the motel under surveillance, but no one had returned to the scene of the crime. They had probably been tipped by the circus of police vehicles present earlier in the day. Mr. X and his minions must have rabbited. I needed to get back to the station. The answers were there. Shanna or one of the others had to know something. They'd be able to tell us where they came from, who the men were, and what they were promised. I sighed and turned the key in the ignition. As I headed away from the office building, I drove through the same neighborhood Brad and I had initially staked out. The crime scene tape had long been removed from where Keith Richardson had plummeted to his death. I turned down the next block, heading away from the apartment buildings and toward the nearby bars and clubs. I had just passed the restaurant where Lila worked when I spotted a group of women entering a nearby warehouse. Clarissa? I blinked. Surely I must be seeing things. At this point, all young blondes look like victims to me, but it was worth checking out. I slowed, circling the warehouse. The nearby spaces were occupied with high-end vehicles and chauffeured cars. Several warehouses had been converted into clubs or pop-ups for raves or other party venues. But this wasn't the trendy part of town. I radioed, advising dispatch I was checking it out, and found a nearby space. 3 men in suits went to the front entrance, but the woman I'd seen had gone through the back. The front door had a surveillance camera and a keypad. The man looked up. One of them held something up to the camera, and the keypad illuminated. After entering a code, the door opened. Obviously, this was invitation only, and I'd left my invite at home. For the next 20 minutes, no one went in or out. The waiting made me twitchy. I didn't see anything suspicious enough to bust in, guns blazing. I needed something concrete besides a passing glimpse of a young blonde woman. Even though my gut insisted Clarissa Behrens was inside, I'd have a hell of a time proving it if I were wrong. Still, I knew I had to get inside. Tucking my badge and gun into my purse, I hefted the bag over my shoulder and headed for the back door. Unlike the front, it didn't have security or guards. I pushed the door open as quietly as possible. It was darker inside, so I didn't notice the man who snuck up behind me until it was too late. He pushed me toward an inner doorway. "What are you doing in here?" His slightly accented voice made the hairs at the back of my neck stand at attention. "You need to change." Change? He shoved me into another room and locked the door behind me. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. I was in a dressing room. A vanity sat in the corner with makeup and hair supplies. A rack of mini dresses stood in the middle of the room. What the hell was this place? I banged against the door. "You're making a mistake. Let me out." But the man on the other side didn't respond. I tried twisting the knob, but it was locked. I could break the door down and go back the way I came, or I could see what was behind door number 2. I chose door number 2. Peering into the hallway, I watched the strobing neon lights through a haze of cigarette smoke. So this was a club. I took a step out of the dressing room, and a woman in her too low, too short cocktail dress nearly collided with me. I didn't recognize her, but she seemed anxious. "Hurry, they want us out there to serve and entertain. You can't do it dressed like that. Who are you? What's going on?" I asked. She pursed her lips. "Go get changed." Again with the changing. "I'm a cop. What is this place?" I asked. She laughed. "Right, you're a cop. Keep dreaming, sweetie." I showed her my badge while keeping an eye on the action. The businessmen I'd seen earlier were now at a table, talking amongst themselves and drinking. A few more were at the bar. Some were flirting or making out with a few of the women. A few others were dancing. The one glaringly obvious discrepancy was the men outnumbered the women 4-1. In the clubs I'd visited, that was never the case. But the women weren't here to party. They were working. "Answer the question." "Oh, yeah, that looks so real," she scoffed. "Like they'd really let a cop in here. You found it in the back with the other costumes and outfits, didn't you?" Personally, I would have gone with the naughty nurse uniform. For a moment, I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. Before I could protest, a man came up to us from behind one of the thick velvet curtains that served as soundproof and hide the ugly graffiti and cement walls. With one look at him, I knew I was in the Twilight Zone. "There you are," Axel Kincaid practically purred. He looped his arms around my waist, grabbed my badge, and shoved it inside my purse, zipping the bag before anyone noticed my gun. "Play along," he whispered, an urgency to his tone. I reached for my bag and he grabbed my hand. "That's enough. I just wanted to make sure you could role play." He smiled at the woman and nuzzled my neck. "She's good at it, isn't she?" "Very good. Now get changed." She gave me a hard look and vanished into the crowd. Axel pushed me back into the changing room and closed the door. "How did you get in? I've spent the better part of an hour looking for a way out. Where's your partner? Is your backup outside?" "I don't have any." "Fuck." He rubbed his eyes. "Why not?" I shook off my confusion. "What is this place? Some new underground club you're scoping out?" Since Kincaid ran an exclusive, members-only club, I couldn't help but think he was here to check out the competition. He might have wanted the police to shut it down for purely selfish reasons. He loosened his tie and unbuttoned the top button, as if the confinement was adding to his stress. "I don't know what this place is, but it isn't good. We have to get out of here." "What the hell are you even doing here?" "Don't." His ice blue eyes blazed. "You came to me for help, remember? I asked if you knew anything about a car. And someone tipped you about that, right?" He moved closer, and my hand automatically went for my gun. Even though my investigation into Axel Kincaid resulted in him being officially cleared of any suspicion, he was a car thief by trade with a violent past. I didn't trust him. He was a club owner who boasted creating the Vegas experience by getting anyone just about anything. I had no doubt he ran drugs and possibly girls out of Spark, but I needed answers and thought he could help. I just didn't expect to find him in the midst of my investigation. He grabbed my wrist. "I'm not the enemy, Liv. You don't need to be afraid of me. That tip nearly got me killed. Who called it in?" He searched my eyes for a moment. "You're serious?" "Yes." "It doesn't matter who called. He didn't try to harm you. And for the record, that wasn't my intention. You asked a question, I answered. It's that simple." "What is this place? How do you find it?" "I'm not sure what it is, but it's dangerous, especially for women." I jerked my hand out of his grip and took a step back. "Why are you here?" "I hear things. According to the whispers, this is the ultimate experience. It's only available to serious, hardcore thrill seekers." He took a step back, sensing I wasn't comfortable with his proximity. He watched the suspicion dance across my face. "Check your phone." Keeping one eye on him, I fished out the device. No signal. "They're using jammers. All cell phone and radio signals are blocked. Did you notice the heavy hitters? The exits are covered by former Special Forces guys with automatic weapons. No one's going anywhere. We need another way out." "How many guys?" I moved toward the door. I had to get the lay of the land. Was this a hostage situation? "I counted 4. He stopped me before I could open the door. "You go out there like that, and they'll kill you on sight. You need to get out of here." "I need to get these people out of here." I cracked the door open and peered out. I could make out the outline of 2 guys near the front. "Where are the other 2? "They're at the side door. It's to your left." I pressed my cheek against the door jamb, but at this angle, I couldn't see that far. But no one acted worried. It appeared everyone was having a good time. I spun, assessing Axel. Spending 3 months embedded in his club meant I'd gotten to know him. I could tell when he was stressed, and right now, that dial was cranked to 11. I just didn't know if it was because I interrupted the party, or if he actually feared for his life. "Tell me everything you know." I shut the door and moved to the rear of the room. The door I'd been forced through earlier remained locked, but since it might be our only way out, I'd find a way to open it. "Who's in that room? Who are the women?" "From what I gather, they're part of a service. A cross between escorts and catering." "You ever hire them?" His tone turned cold. "No, detective." "And the guests? The men drinking and dancing, what about them?" "I know a few." I twisted the knob, but it didn't budge. I knelt down and removed the lockpick kit from my purse. "Do they have names?" "Yes." He eyed the lock. "You're not going to get that open. It's state-of-the-art, bump-proof, pick-resistant. I have the same model on my doors." A noise sounded from deeper inside the warehouse, and we both froze. I pulled my gun and aimed at the door, but whoever was outside reconsidered. I turned my attention back to the lock. The first thing I had to do when we got outside was call for assistance. ESU would have this place surrounded in minutes. I tucked my gun behind my back and moved to the rack of dresses. A metal bar ran across the top. It was held in place by thin, flat metal brackets. "I need names. Did someone invite you here? How do you know how to get in?" I tossed the dresses to the side while I struggled to figure out how to disassemble the rack. Axel moved closer to assist, and together we manipulated the main bar out of the side joint. I'm not a rat, Liv. I don't care what you are. I want to know why you're here and how you got inside. He didn't answer. Instead, he met me at the locked door and took the flat metal square from my hand the moment I pulled the pin free from the bottom hinge. He worked the flat metal between the pin and the hinge at the top, a much easier feat for him since he was significantly taller. Axel, talk to me. The invite went out yesterday to a certain clientele. It listed the time and location. He pulled a sheet of paper out of his pocket and held it out. That got me inside. I looked at the paper, but it didn't provide any details, just the cryptic message and the promise of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Is Clarissa Behrens here? I don't know. I saw the guilt in his eyes. Tell me what you do know. So you can arrest me? I might do that anyway. He let out an unhappy harumph. What did you hear or see, hypothetically? I asked. He finally pulled the pin free. Now we just had to remove the door from the wall. The lock would remain locked, but it wouldn't matter with the door no longer attached. It's possible. A former member of Spark said women were going up for auction tonight. I convinced him to give me the address and the entry code. He nodded at the paper. Let me be clear. This is his invitation, not mine. And for the record, I'd like to get the hell out of here. Who told you about this? Why didn't you report this to the police? It doesn't matter. It fucking does. We pulled the door free, and I slipped into the narrow hallway. It remained dark, but the bastard who locked me inside wouldn't get the jump on me again. Stay behind me. Liv, Axel protested. We have to get out of here. These men mean business. Do you know who they are? Do you know Mr. X? Mr. X? For the briefest moment, I feared Axel could be Mr. X. Maybe he was going to all this trouble just to get me out of the way, so I couldn't interfere in any more of his illicit dealings. I glanced behind me, seeing the reflective gleam of the metal bar he carried like a bat. Any minute, he could bash my skull in. Yeah, one of the women identified him. I waited for Axel to swing, but he didn't. Instead, we made it to the exit without incident. Obviously, the man who locked me inside must have left. We just need a name. I can't help you. Can't or won't. But he didn't answer. Once outside, I reached for my phone, but we were still too close to the jammers. I couldn't get a signal. I took a step toward the car, but I heard gunshots. Normal people ran from gunfire. Cops were trained to run toward it. Call for help, I ordered, before turning and racing back inside. 28. The sound had been muffled, but I knew it well. 2 shots in rapid succession. And then silence. That's what didn't make sense. Screams usually followed gunfire. I palmed my gun and slipped back inside. The hallway was clear. The dressing room remained undisturbed. I pressed my back against the wall and slowly opened the door. Nothing had changed, but I knew I heard shots, and they had come from somewhere inside this warehouse. My gaze swept the interior. The 2 guards remained at the front, but the 2 Axel had seen guarding the side were gone. I stuck to the walls and moved through the warehouse. The hazy air and poor lighting helped conceal my approach. The men were oblivious. The few who were even aware of the women in the room had other things on their minds besides me. However, the 2 men with automatic weapons probably wouldn't take kindly to my presence, so I tried to blend in and stay hidden. What are you doing, Liv? The voice in my head asked. I should be outside waiting for backup. ESU would be sweeping the place, not me. I didn't even have a vest. Still, I couldn't shake the surreal feeling. No one was panicked. No one was hurt. And no one else seemed to have heard the 2 gunshots. Even the big guns at the door acted nonchalant. Maybe I was wrong. I hid behind the velvet curtain near the side door. It was cracked open, but Axel had been wrong. It didn't lead outside. It led to a control room. From my position, I could see a dozen monitors and a control board for the sound system and lights. A man sat in a chair, his focus entirely on the screens. I crept inside, sweeping my aim from side to side, but no one else was in the room. Slowly, I approached the man. One of the screens caught my attention, and I pressed the muzzle of my gun into the back of his head. "Police," I announced. "Raise your hand slowly or I'll blow your fucking head off." He did as I said, and I expertly clicked my handcuff around his right wrist before twisting his arm around the back of the chair. I took a step back, my gun never wavering, as I wrestled his other hand behind the back of the chair. Then I shoved my gun into my waistband and bound his hands together. Tugging his chair away from the control board, I spun him around to face me. "Where are they?" I gestured at the monitor. The bottom screen showed 6 women trapped in cages. He chuckled, so I hit him across the face with the butt of my gun. His cheek bled, and he spit. "Fuck you!" "Wrong answer!" I reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. But just like every other asshole we'd encountered in the course of the investigation, he didn't have an ID. "Tell me where they are!" I cocked my gun. "You're a cop. You can't shoot an unarmed man. "Wanna bet?" Briefly, his eyes darted to the screens, and he started jabbering nonsense, asking dozens of questions. He wanted to distract me. He didn't want me to see something. I turned around just in time to see an armed man drag one of the women out by the legs, leaving a bright red smear in her wake. She'd been shot. Those were the 2 shots I heard. The cages had to be in this building. But where? The asshole kept dithering even more frantically as I clicked keys, toggling the footage and trying to decipher the camera's location. The wheels on his chair made a skidding noise. I turned and he stopped fidgeting. "Get up!" I grabbed him by the crook of his arm and jerked him out of the chair, knocking it to the floor in my haste. "You're going to take me to them. If anyone shoots at me, the bullet's going through you first." "I'm not taking you anywhere." "Then I'll kill you now." I pointed at the screen. "She's either dead or dying. No one gives a shit what a decorated detective does to some asshole killer. We're in a dark warehouse filled with civilians and at least 4 heavily armed men. I'm just one woman. Who do you think a jury will believe?" "Fine. There's a hallway just to the right of this room. It leads to the cages." I found a roll of duct tape on the desk and covered his mouth. I couldn't afford for him to call for help. Since I was alone, I needed the element of surprise, and I couldn't be certain this wasn't a trap. I shoved him out the door and moved to the right. As he said, there was an opening for a hallway a few feet away, concealed by the curtain. I kept a hand on his shoulder, letting him lead the way down the hall. This wasn't procedure, but nothing about this case had been. I strained to hear sirens, but I didn't hear anything. Was help on the way? He stopped suddenly, hunching over and jerking away. He tried to knock me into the wall with his shoulder, and I kicked him hard in the stomach. The way he moved triggered a memory of Clarissa Behrens' abduction footage. I knew this guy looked familiar. He kidnapped Clarissa. He barreled toward me again, hoping to push past and escape. He almost succeeded, but at the last second, I grabbed the back of his shirt and swept my leg out. He lost his footing, tripped, and crashed against the wall. He didn't move again. I checked his pulse to find he was out cold. I didn't know how long that would last, but I had to neutralize the armed men. If not, I didn't know if any of the women would survive. I was right. Clarissa was here. Taking a breath, I slipped through the open doorway. The only sound came from the buzzing of the light fixtures. The cages were pressed against the walls of the room. Unlike the hidden room we found inside the house, the women weren't chained to anything. Instead, they were held prisoner in tiny crates that would have been too cruel to house the canine unit. The wet smear on the floor turned my stomach. The men were close. I could feel it. Shifting my aim from the left to the right, I didn't spot either of the two men. Maybe Axel was wrong. Or maybe it was one gunman and the other guy was the prick I knocked out. The nearest woman looked up, and I recognized her from the photos on our board. "Shh," I whispered. "It's okay, Abigail. I'm Detective DeMarco. I'm going to get you out of here." How do you know my name? How did you know I was here?" Her questions drew the attention of the other 4 women, who all pleaded with me to let them out. I looked at their faces, recognizing Clarissa and Yasmin from their photos. The other 2 I didn't know. "We've been searching for you, all of you." I examined the cages, unable to figure out the locking mechanism. "I'm going to get you home." I glanced behind me. "Where'd he go?" "He took Lila," one of the other women said. "She wouldn't listen. He wanted her to behave and she said no. He shot her twice." All right. The last thing I wanted to do was leave them trapped in this hellhole, but I didn't know how to get them out. I tugged on the cage door, but it didn't budge. "It's electronic," Clarissa said. "He was bitching that his friend was dicking around instead of paying attention and opening the doors." "Okay. The unlock mechanism might be in the control room. I'll be right back." "You can't leave us," Yasmin said, her voice shaky and desperate. "He might come back. He said he'll kill us if we don't behave. Please don't leave us here." "Backup should be here any second. I'll be back soon. You're going to be okay." Listening to the desperate cries nearly broke my heart, but I had to find Lila. I had to stop the animal who took her before he could inflict more damage. Swallowing, I followed the blood trail away from the cages. It led into an adjoining room, which might have been a storage closet at one point. The only light came from the open doorway, and I reached into my bag for a flashlight before stepping inside. With the flashlight held in my left, just beneath my gun, I entered the room. Shelves lined the walls. Near the back, I found Lila. I swept the beam of light to the left and right, but I didn't see the man. How could he have vanished into thin air? Lila let out a pained gasp, and I stepped closer, the beam of light darting back and forth. Where was he? After a final check, I crouched down beside her. She'd been shot in the chest, a through and through. "Lila?" I asked softly, my voice low. "Where is he?" Her eyes fluttered. She spoke, but I couldn't hear her. I leaned in closer, and that's when he jumped down from the top of the shelves. Before I could even turn, he wrestled me onto my stomach, locking the crook of his elbow tightly around my neck. I tried to tuck my chin in like we were taught, but he didn't give me enough room. He yanked my hair, holding my head back and in place. In those 10 seconds, every mistake and missed opportunity ran through my mind, and then there was nothing. 29. A shock of pain erupted across my cheek, but it wasn't enough to force me to open my eyes. "Wake up!" He hit me again. Slowly, I blinked. Where was I? I tried to move, but realized 2 men were holding me down. My head hung off the foot of the bed, and everything was upside down. It was hard to stay focused, and it seemed like any minute I might be sick. Where am I? I tried to lift my head to see the asshole who struck me, but strong hands pushed even harder against my clavicle. I tried to move my legs, but the two men sat on top of my thighs. I turned my head to the side. I didn't see Lila. If we were still in the converted warehouse, this was a room I hadn't seen before. Twisting again, I caught a glimpse of one of the men, Oleg Vorshkovich. The other man, the one who had spoken, wore a Guy Fawkes mask over his face. Were they out of ski masks at Criminals Anonymous? I asked. Although I much prefer that getup to homicidal clown. I found my right hand wasn't pinned down and ran my palm over the threadbare spread. Oh, wait, that would have been too on the nose. He snorted. It was an ugly, vulgar sound. Huh. You think you're clever. I found you, didn't I? I swallowed the bile that burned the back of my throat. We can exchange snippy comments all day, but I have places to be. You're not going anywhere until you tell me what the police know. He dismissed Oleg and climbed on top of me, both knees digging into my thighs while his hands held down my shoulders. Oleg disappeared from view, only to return with a bucket and a towel. You decide how painful this will be, Detective DeMarco. Too bad I like pain. He slapped me again, hard enough that I tasted blood. So do I. Oleg put the bucket beneath my head and switched places with the Guy Fawkes impersonator. The man in the mask wore a three-piece suit. He took off his jacket, and I caught a glimpse of the designer label. He rolled up his sleeves, and I eyed the flashy timepiece on his wrist. Guy Fawkes, that's rather apropos, I said. The real Fawkes and his gunpowder plot failed, and now his effigy gets burned on top of bonfires. So I'm going to make sure you burn for this. He leaned closer, and the look in his eyes scared the crap out of me. How much do the police know about my operation? Your operation? I laughed. Everyone knows you want to blow up the House of Parliament. That's why you've been stockpiling powder kegs. Enough. He turned to Oleg, who held the towel firmly against my face. I couldn't see what was happening, but there was only one way this could go. Within moments, the towel became heavy and suffocating as it took on water. I held my breath. Struggling would make it worse. I'd drown faster. But he expected my trick and hit me hard enough in the gut to force the air from my lungs. And then I was choking, gasping down water as I struggled for air. When I didn't think I could take it anymore, the water stopped, and he pulled the towel away. I coughed up a lungful of water. My hair soaked, my throat and lungs burning. What do they know? He asked. Everything. Bullshit. He shoved the towel over my face again and poured. I sputtered, desperate to breathe. He was still talking, but his words were garbled. My lungs burned from lack of air, and the fear of drowning overtook my senses. Seconds before my body could betray my resolve not to breathe in even more water, he pulled the towel away. Water dripped from my face and hair. After a coughing fit, I gasped for breath. I'll ask you one more time. How did you know to come here? We have Dmitri. He told us plenty. Dmitri's dead. I made sure of that. I blinked the water from my eyes. You killed him? I remembered the lab coat we found in the motel room. You infiltrated his hospital room. Despite the smiling mask, I knew this sicko was smiling underneath, too. I just had to wait for you to leave before I could do it. I didn't want you to recognize me. That meant I must know who this guy was. Who did I know that Agent Peters didn't? Unless it was Agent Peters. What did the girls at the motel tell you? The man asked. Why, so you can kill them too? He reached for another giant jug of water. Do you know who I am? I forced myself to laugh. You're scared, and you should be. Did you honestly believe the moniker Mr. X and a pathetic theater mask were enough to save you? The next round of torture lasted even longer. Somewhere between the water and lack of air, I lost consciousness. When I finally came back around, Oleg was pumping his palms up and down on my chest, and the water I had coughed up felt too warm, like it had been trapped inside so long it had reached a balmy 98.6 degrees. You shut down the motel. You made arrests. Who are the police coming after next? He asked. You. He reached for the towel. Don't! I begged between gasps. My entire body was racked with shivers, and my head pounded a rhythm in time to my racing pulse. The water in the bucket beneath me was tinged red, and I didn't want to think too hard about why that was. Then tell me what I want to know, he shrieked. How did you find the house and warehouse? How did you know where to look? I told you. I struggled to sit up, but Oleg put his hands against my shoulders and shoved me back against the bed. The wooden frame dug into my shoulder blades. We have an informant. He told us where to find the car and how to find Clarissa, Lila, and Abigail. My thoughts went to the locked cages. What happened to them? Were they dead now? We have the women. We know you're selling them overseas. Interpol has a file on you, on your associates. I smiled, despite my chattering teeth. You're fucked. It'd be best if you turn yourself in now. I looked again at his jacket, watch, and mask. I'd seen them before. Stop wasting my time. He reached for the towel, but I kept talking, hoping my words would hold him off. Why'd you do it? Aren't you supposed to stand for female empowerment? Isn't that one of your mission statements? I'm sure I read that in a brochure or on your company website. Maybe it was hanging on the plaque behind your desk. His anger grew. Silence! I couldn't reason with the guy behind the mask, but maybe I could appeal to the Eastern European. Oleg Vorshkovich! I gasped out. See, we know everything, and I know he'll kill you next, or sell you out to the authorities like he's done to all the others. Like Dmitri and Keith. Oleg cocked his head up. His grip loosened slightly. What does Interpol know? I used that opportunity to slide down the bed, so my head wasn't hanging quite so far off the edge. Oleg allowed me to move, wanting to look into my eyes while I answered his question. They have a file on you, Mr. Vorshkovich. They know what you've done, who you work for in Russia. They've been tracking your activities for quite some time. They want your boss. They'll take this prick instead. I can cut you a deal. While he was distracted by my words, my fingers brushed against the edge of his pants. I coughed again, my entire body jerking against him. It was a trick pickpockets used, and while I'd never snatched a guy's wallet off the street, I managed to snag the switchblade from Oleg's pocket without him noticing. I concealed it beneath my palm, waiting for an opportunity. Enough of this. She'll say anything. She wants to scare us. End her. Guy Fawkes moved away from the bed, rolled his sleeves down, and slipped his jacket on. And clean up when you're finished. Wait! I tried to swallow, my throat raw and painful. How do you get the FBI badges and access codes? The masked man laughed. I thought you knew everything. I guess you don't, and you never will. He turned to Oleg. She's yours. You can play with her if you like, but make sure none of this traces back to me. Understand? Oleg nodded. The fact that it would all be over soon wasn't comforting. It was morbid. Last chance, Oleg, I said. Everyone knows the truth. You're wanted. Your best bet is to run far and fast. It's the only way of getting out of here. You can't trust him. He kills his own people or convinces them to off themselves like Keith. Who is he going to send to steal your body from the morgue? And suddenly, it made sense. That's why you stole the van from the FBI. He told you to. He knew we'd discover the bodies were gone. He wanted us to find you. He set you up to be his fall guy. That's why he's leaving you behind with me. He'll probably tip the police as soon as he walks out that door. That's not true, Guy Fawkes said. Oleg glared at him and said something in Russian, but the masked man promised to take care of it and headed toward the door. Oleg tugged on my arms, pulling me fully onto the mattress. My shoulder blades scraped painfully against the frame. I hissed, but the sound was cut off when he shoved a pillow against my face. He pressed down hard, holding it tight. At least it was fractionally better than drowning. With whatever energy I had left, I thrashed and struggled. My limbs brushed against his. Through the pillow, I heard the distinctive sound of a door slamming. Mustering all my strength, I flicked the release and plunged the blade into Oleg's thigh. He howled. The pillow no longer pressed against my face, and I twisted the knife, digging it in deeper. He reared back, blood pumping out of the gaping wound. He pulled the knife free, a shriek erupting from his lips as blood droplets splattered over me, the walls, and the floor. He lunged forward, planning to slice my throat. I rolled off the bed and crashed to the floor, just as the blade swung down, slashing into the mattress. The outer walls shook, and I heard repeated commands echoing. There was a good chance I was hallucinating, because the yelling and threats sounded like they were coming from Brad. Where is she? What have you done to her? The walls shook again. Tell me now! Another two voices joined Brad's, and suddenly the door burst inward. And Oleg, with the knife in the air, was hit twice with beanbag rounds. Thunderous footsteps entered the room. Suspect down. I remained on the floor while two members of ESU cleared the room. Officer down. Repeat, officer down. Fennel brought up the rear, honing in on me immediately. Liv. He crouched on the floor, taking in the remnants of the waterboarding. We need help over here. I shivered and coughed, weak, dizzy, and spattered in Oleg's blood. I'm okay. ESU cuffed Oleg, but they were more concerned with my health. He'll bleed out in under 5 minutes if you don't get him to a hospital. We might still need him. Get him medical attention. I'm fine. They looked to Brad, who asked, You really want to save the asshole who did this to you? Oleg didn't do this. I saw the confusion in Brad's eyes. He's wearing a 3-piece suit and a Guy Fawkes mask. Did you get him? Who? The asshole in the Guy Fawkes mask. I saw the confusion on Brad's face. V for Vendetta? Brad shook his head. Maybe he took off. We found another guy in the hallway. Brad described him, but I was certain it was the asshole I cuffed from the control room. Wrong guy. You have to get him before he escapes. He won't escape. The building's surrounded. I'm not leaving you, Liv. Fennel, if you don't stop him, he'll find a way out and start over somewhere else. I can't live knowing I'm the reason for that. You have to stop him. My eyes met Brad's. I'd never seen him look so scared. I tried to sit up, but I was too shaky. I'm not going anywhere. You have to nail Dale Crenshaw. Do it for me. 30. Crenshaw slipped out of the makeshift bedroom. He designed the room in case any of his clients wanted to sample the girls before buying. But that never happened since he needed the privacy to question the detective. She must have been lying, he convinced himself. She never used his name. The things she said were merely speculation. She wanted to scare him, but he wouldn't scare this easily. He had a plan, and he intended to stick with it. But then he heard the echoing words. Police! Freeze! Shit. He darted down a hidden corridor that lined the back of the warehouse. The back hallways and offices were like a maze. He had to get to the side door before they found him. Pulling the mask off his face, he wasn't sure what to do with it. He couldn't risk leaving it behind. The police would trace it back to him, and his life would be ruined. But it would be game over if they caught him with the mask. The commands grew louder. He heard gunshots. Oleg must have been eliminated. The detective was right about one thing. He intended to let the Russian take the fall for everything. The teams he hired, the mercenaries at the door, they were all Eastern Europeans and known associates of the Russian. He entered one of the back offices and stood on a chair to reach the vent. Removing the grate, he stuffed the mask inside and replaced the metal panel. The police would never find it there. Maybe he'd come back for it later, but right now, he had to get out. He ran down the hallway to the side door and slipped the key into the lock. Cautiously, he opened the door a crack. Police vehicles were just feet away. He shut the door. He couldn't go out that way. Fuck. Crenshaw thought about the costumes in the dressing room. He had those brought there to appease his kinkier clients, but he didn't remember if there were any police jackets in the mix. He had a few from the uniform catalog shoot, but he didn't remember if they were here. He used the warehouse to store a lot of props, since he never knew what he'd need, or what his buyers might want to see the girls dressed as. Maybe he could get out by pretending to be a cop. Before he could make it another step, he heard the voice behind him. Freeze! Crenshaw raised his hands in the air and slowly turned around. Thank God. He smiled at the cop. They lured me here. I've been searching for a way out. The men at the doors have guns. They wouldn't let us leave. Detective Fennel didn't lower his weapon. Get down on your knees. Hands behind your head. Crenshaw slowly knelt on the ground. You're making a big mistake. I'm not one of them. The hell you aren't. Fennel took a step closer. What's your name? Crenshaw sensed this was a trap. Answer me. I'm innocent. I'm not with them, Crenshaw insisted. I tried to call for help, but my phone won't work. We found the jammer. We found Dennis Hiver. And your pal, Oleg Vorshkovich, is on his way to the hospital. Now answer my fucking question. The blood drained from Crenshaw's face. He knew he was caught. My name's Stan. Stan Havisham. My ID is in my breast pocket. Fennel didn't believe him, but he had to make sure. Reach into your pocket slowly and toss me your ID. Crenshaw did as he was told, and when Brad reached down to scoop up the wallet, Crenshaw pulled a gun. Gun! I yelled, pushing away from the ESU officer who was helping me down the hallway. My legs wobbled, and I grabbed the wall for support. My partner didn't need me to make the announcement. He had never taken his eyes off Crenshaw, and when the suspect pulled the gun, Brad fired, hitting Crenshaw squarely in the shoulder. Crenshaw fell backward. The gun clattered to the ground, and Brad jumped on him. Within moments, Crenshaw was on his belly, his hands cuffed behind him. You fuck with my partner, and I'll fuck with you. Brad kicked Crenshaw hard in the ribs, and a member of the tactical team pulled him away. Another officer took over, and they held Brad until he calmed down. When they let go of my partner, Brad stepped away. He picked up the gun Crenshaw had dropped and looked at it. He tucked it into his waistband and retrieved the dropped wallet. Dale Crenshaw. I found your gun, Liv. Brad slipped beneath my arm before my legs gave out. You really need to learn to hang on to this. The city entrusted it to you for a reason. Yeah. I wrapped my arms around his shoulders, and he scooped me off the ground. Are you okay? I am now. What about the women in the cages? And Lila James? We have to help them. Half the force is here. They'll take care of that. Right now, let's just take care of you." He carried me out of the warehouse and into the back of a waiting ambulance. 31. When I entered the bullpen the next day, there was a round of applause. Brad, who'd been behind me on the stairs, took some dramatic bows while I rolled my eyes and made my way to my desk. We had a big day ahead of us. We didn't have time for this. "Good job, DeMarco," Officer Roberts said. I looked up. That might have been the first nice thing he ever said to me. And it would probably be the last. I nodded and scanned the notes that had piled up on my desk. Fennel didn't bother to sit down. "Warrant's ready." He eyed me curiously, seeing the dark bruises poking out from under my collar. "You went through something yesterday. Are you sure you don't want to sit this one out?" "Come on, Brad. This is the fun part. Plus, I want to see this through." He grabbed some scissors off his desk. "In that case, give me your wrist. I can't spend the day running around with an escaped mental patient." "They didn't put me in the psych ward," I protested as he cut the hospital bracelet off. "Clearly, an oversight." He tossed it into the wastebasket. I finished reading the updates and went into Grayson's office to collect my newly returned service piece. Officers found my cuffs on Dennis Hiver, Clarissa's kidnapper. The 5 women in the cage were in the hospital, undergoing evaluation, but physically they'd be okay. I hadn't heard what happened to Lila, and I was afraid to ask. On my way out, I looked at the board. We never found Tanya, one of the first abductees we knew about. But we found 2 others we didn't know were missing. I hated to think how many more were out there, who'd already been killed, sold, or worse. Setting my jaw, I followed Fennel to the car. It was time we got answers. "Hey, talk to me," Brad said. "How do you know it was Crenshaw? If you hadn't told me it was him, he might have managed to sneak out. Did you see his face?" "No, but I recognized the suit he wore and his watch. At first I couldn't be sure, but one of the biggest perks for working at Rogers & Stein is getting to keep the samples advertisers leave behind after the shoots. And they had the campaign images plastered on the walls for that designer and that watch. But what gave him away was the mask. The theater company had a room full of donations made by Rogers & Stein. They had a dozen or more of those masks lining the backstage area in the theater. And let's not forget, Crenshaw had access to everyone and everything. He got the fake FBI badges when they shot the photos for the uniform catalog. Fennel pulled to a stop in front of Crenshaw's mansion. Dale Crenshaw was in custody. His prints were all over the jugs of water he'd poured down my throat, but we wanted evidence of his other bad acts. "All right, let's see what we find." Another team simultaneously served a second search warrant at the modeling agency, but I didn't believe Crenshaw would leave sensitive and damning materials at work, especially when I knew he'd been out sick the last 2 days. He knew we were coming. He booked 2 first-class airline tickets to a non-extradition country. Once he dumped the rest of the cargo, he planned to run. If I hadn't found him last night, he'd be on a tropical island sipping Mai Tais instead of getting to know his fellow offenders in lockup. "Mrs. Crenshaw," Fennel said, when the suspect's wife opened the door. "We have a warrant to search the property." Her eyebrows knit together. "Where's my husband? Where's Dale?" "Ma'am?" I nodded to the officers, and they pushed their way inside. "Let's go inside and talk." Mrs. Crenshaw refused to believe any of what we had to say. As far as she was concerned, her husband was a decent and kind man. She insisted he was innocent. But a thorough examination of his office, phone, and computer records proved otherwise. We found offshore numbered accounts. His desk drawer contained documents indicating he owned and registered the dummy corporations and LLCs that rented the motel rooms, the house, and the warehouse. His records went back nearly a decade. "How many women do you think he's trafficked?" Fennel asked. I looked at the details on Crenshaw's hidden accounts. "More than we know about. At least we have enough to put him away for consecutive life sentences. Too bad that won't bring any of the women back. Maybe we can convince him to cooperate. We can offer him a nice window in his prison cell, or maybe a sturdy support beam he can use to hang himself. Yeah, maybe. But I doubted he'd talk." On the drive back to the precinct, my phone rang. "DeMarco, you told me to call if no one came back for that car," Officer Chen said. He'd been sitting on the monthly stay condos since we shut them down. "It's the only one left. I ran the plates. It's registered to a Nathan Lentz. According to motel records, he's a guest. But we checked his room. It's completely empty." "Do you have his photo ID?" I asked. That was the same car Brad and I checked out. "I'll send it to you." I waited for the image to appear, and then I cursed. Immediately, I called to get another warrant. "Change of plans," I said to Brad. "What's going on?" "I know who Keith Richardson is." Although the photo ID of Nathan Lentz barely resembled the man I encountered on the roof, I remembered his eyes. I'd never forget them. Nathan Lentz had a thick, unruly beard, a shaved head, and thick glasses. It was no wonder Facial Rec had problems identifying him from the photos we had of Keith Richardson. They hardly looked alike. By the time we made it to Lentz's address, a patrol car was waiting outside. I got out of the car and spoke to the officers. The apartment was rented to Nathan Lentz and Scarlett Archer, the mother of Lentz's only son. According to the birth certificate, Nathan Jr. was 3 years old. The warrant hadn't come through yet, but I knocked on the door anyway. An attractive woman around my age answered. She looked exhausted. Her clothes had food stains and her hair was messy. "Ma'am, I'm Detective DeMarco. This is my partner, Detective Fennel." "Where's Keith?" she asked. "Keith?" I didn't expect her to use his alias. "My boyfriend, Nathan." She shook her head. "He goes by Keith. He's been missing. Well, no, that's not true. He left us. He called one night last week and told me he wasn't coming back. He said it was for the best, that he was doing it for our son." "Your son?" Brad asked, gazing into the apartment. She realized she should invite us in and stepped away from the door. "He's sick. Really sick. Keith said he'd take care of it, that he'd find a new job, something that pays well. And we finally caught up on the bills. Nate just went into remission." She dabbed her eyes. "We don't know if it'll last. I don't know why he'd leave now. The hard part's over. Nate needs his dad." She saw the expression on my face, and hers contorted into a silent scream. Brad grabbed her before she collapsed. He helped her to the couch and held out his phone. "Ma'am, do you recognize this man?" She nodded, her lips trembling. "That's Keith. Where is he?" "I'm sorry to tell you this," Brad continued, as she sobbed. I turned away. Now I understood what made Keith kill himself. Crenshaw threatened his son and his family. Crenshaw must have paid the boy's medical bills in exchange for Keith finding women to abduct. Suddenly, I didn't feel so good, but I held it together, relieved Fennel was willing to pick up the slack. We didn't need the warrant. Scarlett gave us everything we needed and more. By the time we left, I wanted to try out my own waterboarding techniques on Crenshaw. "He's not innocent," Fennel said. "Keith chose to take those women. Not only did he abduct them, but he killed Ingrid. Sure, he needed the money, but there are other ways. Ways that don't destroy lives and families. He inflicted more hurt on this world than what he faced." Fennel forced me to look at him. "It's not your fault that little boy doesn't have a dad and that woman doesn't have her partner. Keith put himself in this position. He could have come to us at any time, But he didn't. His death is his own. I know. It just sucks. I thought you said this was the fun part. I was wrong. We spent the rest of the day processing evidence, speaking to witnesses and the men we had in custody, and building our case. Agent Peters came in to assist. Dale Crenshaw would be facing both state and federal charges in addition to his international crimes. His position at Rogers and Stein had allowed him to meet many famous people. Some of those people had security details made up of former federal agents. We suspected that's how he found out how to gain access to the FBI's motor pool and the ME's office. The FBI was looking into possible security breaches and would bring anyone who posed a threat to security in for questioning. At least Crenshaw would never be able to hurt anyone again. Hopefully, Interpol would be able to use our evidence to shut down the overseas branches of the human trafficking ring. They already had the Russian in custody. Based on Crenshaw's records, he bought and sold to South America and Eastern Europe. This was so much bigger than the 4 missing women. This was monumental. The FBI picked up Ivan Sergey at the airport. After the raid, he tried to flee. But his passport was flagged and he was arrested. Oleg Vorshkovich survived, and that gave us 2 accomplices who'd be more than happy to flip on Crenshaw and their Russian boss in exchange for asylum and protection. Initially, Crenshaw used his position at Rogers and Stein to find women. He approached those who weren't selected by the modeling agency and offered them alternative gigs. That's how Shanna and the others ended up in the motel. He didn't know if there was a market for women with their particular attributes, so he'd hold on to them for 6 months at a time. If one of his buyers selected from the stable, he'd tell her he had a job for her, that it was her big break. She'd be flown out of the country and sold into slavery. And if not, he'd send her on her way. The women lucky enough not to be chosen were unharmed and released, clueless to the potential danger they had faced. But sometimes, Crenshaw's buyers wanted women with different attributes, and that led Crenshaw to enlist Keith's help. Since Crenshaw knew Keith from his work at the community center, collecting donations from Rogers and Stein, he must have known of Keith's financial predicament. So he turned Keith into an asset. Unfortunately, Keith wasn't a criminal mastermind. The police eventually realized the women he abducted were missing, so when Ingrid, our Jane Doe from the alley, had overheard the men talking in the motel room, she realized this wasn't her chance at modeling stardom and escaped. She sought help, but didn't get very far before Ivan realized she was gone and recaptured her. Ivan called Crenshaw, and Crenshaw told Keith to take care of it. That's when everything started falling apart. Desperate, Crenshaw planned to set up his buyers to take the fall, but we intervened just in time. Any idea where Tanya or the others have disappeared over the years? I asked Agent Peters when he left the interrogation room. Interpol agents are raiding compounds as we speak. Hopefully, Crenshaw's buyers have easily traceable records. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we find them. Me too. Peters clapped me on the shoulder, and I tried to hide my wince. For a moment, back at the hospital, I got the distinct impression you thought I might be behind this. Well, Crenshaw orchestrated Dimitri's death, and he had Oleg and Dimitri steal the van from the FBI. I was just following the evidence. Next time, give your friends with badges the benefit of the doubt. Most of the time, we're the good guys. Well, Oleg and Dimitri also had badges. You can see why I was confused. Peters smiled. You're forgiven, Detective, and thanks for bringing this to our attention. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. We just had to put on the final touches, but the case was closed. Maybe I'd take a few personal days to regroup and recover. Fennel finished his interview with David Hennon and returned to his desk. Looks like Hennon's clean. He told us he let Keith drive the van, and we found prints inside the back that are a match. Keith must have used the community center's van to abduct Lila. How is she? I asked. Lucky. The bullets didn't hit any vital organs. She'll be fine. That's good to hear. I narrowed my eyes. I'm confused about something. What's that? How do you know where I was? Kincaid called and tipped us off. I also have a feeling he's the reason the warehouse was empty when we got there. Those businessmen you kept talking about, not a single one was in the main room. Neither were the escorts or caterers. You think he cleared the place? Weren't those his clients or associates? Fennel asked. I shrugged. Do you want to bring him in? He saved you. And when we did a deep dive into his financials on the last case, nothing indicated he's involved with human trafficking or Dale Crenshaw. As far as I'm concerned, this is his one free pass. But it's up to you. I stared at the heaping pile of paperwork. I don't want to fill out any more forms, so we'll let this slide for now. Officers followed up with him, right? Brad nodded. Okay, then I'll just finish this and go home. I could use a break. You deserve it. We deserve it, I corrected, but the dark cloud remained over Fennel's head. 32. Before going home that night, I stopped by Spark. Rick nodded at me when I walked up to the door. Good evening, Liv. The boss is expecting you. Expecting me? I wasn't even sure I'd stop by. Mr. Kincaid's waiting in his office. Drinks are on the house. He opened the door. Thanks, Rick. I stepped inside, expecting the usual dim lights, loud music, and women dancing in cages. Instead, a piano sat in the middle of the dance floor, and a singer was hired to entertain for the evening. It was a somber night for thrill seekers. I took a familiar path past the bar and down the private hallway. I knocked on Axel Kincaid's open door. Rick said you're expecting me. Axel looked up. Something told me you might stop by. Are you here to ask for your waitress job back? Or are you here to arrest me? He held up his wrists. You can cuff me, but you should pat me down first. Who knows what I might be concealing? Taking a seat in front of his desk, I glanced down at the files and papers spread across the mahogany surface. What's this? If you must know, I'm reevaluating Spark's membership. In the last 24 hours, I've drastically reduced my clientele. Perhaps you noticed the lull? I need names. He smirked. Do you have a warrant? I could get one. It'd be a waste of time. Unfortunate shredding accident. See? He held up his pinky. Paper cut. He got up from his desk and reached for a bottle of brandy he kept on the cart in the corner. Are you on duty? No. So this is a social visit. He poured 2 glasses and brought them over. He sat on the edge of the desk and stared down at me while I sipped from the crystal glass. You can't figure out why I would help you after everything you did to me. He took a sip. You betrayed my trust, penetrated my club, lied to me, and used every bit of it against me. Honestly, Liv, I don't know why I helped you either. You don't deserve my help. I was just doing my job, Mr. Kincaid. He took another swallow, hiding the bitterness. I told you we're not that different. I run this place to keep people from going crazy and doing insane shit out there. I give them an outlet, but that doesn't mean I condone disgusting and depraved acts. Human trafficking, sex slaves, that isn't on the menu at Spark. It shouldn't be on the menu anywhere. I just did what any good citizen would do. So why'd you clear the warehouse before the cops arrived? Why won't you give me the names of the men who are interested in buying sex slaves? They'll just find another source. You can't stop them, Axel, but I can. Kincaid's blue eyes flashed to me. It's been handled. What does that mean? It's probably best if you don't concern yourself with those details. He put the glass down and grasped my chin. Gently, he touched his thumb to my split lip. You shouldn't have gone back inside. They could have killed you. From the rumors I heard, they came close. I didn't have a choice. That's the job. You should get a new one. You sound like my mother. I pulled away from him and drained the glass. Assuming nothing pops up, I'm willing to let this one slide. Let's call it even. I put the glass down on the desk and stood. We're not even, Liv. He ran his fingers along my wrist. This makes you 0 for 2. You owe me, and next time I'm cashing in. I didn't realize you needed the money. Come down to the station and fill out the paperwork. You'll get paid like the rest of the department CIs. I wasn't talking about money. If you think you can put a cop on the take, I'll arrest you right now. I wasn't talking about that either. He ran a thumbnail down my hand, and I stepped away from him. Your partner just pulled up? Tell him to come inside and have a drink. I insist. Fennel's here? Axel pointed to the monitor on the wall behind me, and I wondered if Brad had put a tracker on my cell phone. After what happened yesterday, I wouldn't doubt it. Thanks for the offer, but we'll have to decline. It could be construed as a bribe. You're determined to find some reason to arrest me, aren't you? Axel asked. You just can't wait to get me in cuffs again. Ignoring him, I went to the door. Liv, wait a sec. He put his glass down and approached me. Regardless of what you believe, I'm not a bad guy. And I'm glad you're okay. Try to stay that way. He kissed my cheek. Stay safe out there. Shaking off the confusion, I went outside and met my partner. What are you doing here? Apparently, we had the same thought. Brad scratched his head and eyed the front of the club. Did he tell you anything? I thought you said you were letting this go. Brad gave me a challenging look. You said the same thing. He chuckled. Great minds. Obviously. I bit my lip and glanced back at Spark. He won't snitch. He did for the DEA. Yeah, and I bet they had some serious leverage. We don't. I rubbed my sore shoulders and grimaced. There's something I need to talk to you about. Come back to Emma's, and I'll grill up those grass-fed steaks and make some sweet potato fries. You're hurt. I'll make the steaks. After dinner, I broke the news to Brad. Remember when I turned in my transfer papers? That was months ago. Yeah, well, Grayson told me after we closed this case, my request would get fast-tracked. Brad stared down at his napkin. You wanted out of intelligence. You've never liked the look of impropriety, having your commanding officer be the same man who was your dad's partner. He looked up at me. Where will you go? I don't know. For some reason, tears started to well. Man, I needed some sleep. I don't want to leave you. You're the best partner a girl could have. I'm also the only one willing to put up with your craziness. He pointed to the top of his head. This morning, I found a gray hair. I pulled it out, but I'm pretty sure you're the one who put it there. Brad, I'm serious. I can't just leave you. Let me tell you something. You have to do what's best for you. Working these undercover gigs isn't good for you. Hell, it isn't good for me either. I can't even leave you alone for half a second without you doing something absolutely insane. I can't lose you, Liv. But if saving you means we're not partners anymore, then we're not partners anymore. Brad, come on, you don't mean that. He pushed away from the table. No, I guess I don't. But after the way this case resolved, I need to make some changes too. So decide what's best for you. Working undercover will get you killed, Liv. And I won't survive losing you like that. So if you get a better offer, take it. He grabbed his jacket and went to the door. Brad! I followed him, feeling as though I'd just been sucker punched. I'm sorry. He turned around and smiled. No reason to be. I always have your back. Just know that. He pressed his lips against my forehead before opening the apartment door. Enjoy your time off. I'll see you Monday. 33. By Monday, everything was back to normal. Fennel acted like we'd never had our conversation. We turned everything over to the DA's office. The prosecutor was confident he had a strong case, and the judge agreed. Crenshaw was denied bail. And the FBI and Interpol continued to dig deeper into the matter. They already conducted several overseas raids and recovered another 7 women Crenshaw had trafficked. They even had a strong lead on locating Tanya. The hospital called to tell us Martha was bouncing back and would be released by the end of the week, and Lila was already back at home. Grayson called me into his office to tell me the good news. "You saved them and countless others. Good job." The captain closed the blinds. "Like I told you last week, your transfer request was approved. Homicide's hoping to poach you. They think you have some serious investigative chops they could use. It's a good posting. It isn't intelligence, but it's comparable. They'll keep you busy and on your toes." He slid the paperwork over to me. "It's yours if you want it." "Captain, I love being here. I love working for you. You've taught me so much." He waved away my sentiments. "Enough of that, Liv. I promised Vince I'd watch out for you, but things get sticky. We have jobs to do, and keeping that promise and upholding the oath we took gets a little dicey sometimes. You have no idea how many times I've thought about assigning you to a desk just because Vince might think the undercover assignment was too dangerous for his little girl." I laughed. "So this hasn't been easy for you, either?" "I didn't become a cop for easy, and neither did you." "No, sir." I stared out the blinds. Brad wasn't at his desk. "Fennel's a good cop." "One of the best. You're our dream team. I hate to lose you." "I don't want to break what isn't broken." "It's rare to find a partner like that. You hold on to him as long as you can." Grayson handed me the form, and I went back to my desk. After sitting on the idea for a few days, I filled out the paperwork and spoke to the homicide lieutenant. Starting next shift, I'd be reporting to him. Grayson knew I was leaving, but I didn't say anything to anyone else. I didn't want to spend a night in a bar recapping cases and listening to embarrassing stories. "Are you really doing this?" Fennel watched as I packed up my desk. The bullpen was nearly empty at this time of night, which is why I waited. "This is what you want?" When I first got assigned to this unit, I wanted to prove myself, to show that I was more than Captain Vince DeMarco's daughter. But after this case, after the things we've seen, I don't have anything left to prove. "So why are you leaving?" Fennel asked. "Because of you and Emma and my mom." Fennel licked his lips. "It's because of what that fucking bastard did to you." "No, but you're right. Undercover's hard. I didn't even go undercover for this case, but it made me realize how much life I'm missing out on every time I get an assignment like that. I don't want to do it this extensively anymore. I want my own place. I want to be me. If I disappear, I want the people I love to notice and not think I'm just working another deep cover assignment. But I'll miss you so much." I rubbed my eyes. "Hey, nothing's going to change. I'll still be around all the time. You'll see." He jerked his chin toward the door. "Now go home. Get some sleep. You have a big day tomorrow. It's your first day at a new school, and you want to make a good first impression, right? You're such a dork. Night, Liv." "Bye, Brad." The next morning, I reported to homicide. Phones rang. Detectives and officers bustled about. It felt just like intelligence. I knocked on the lieutenant's door. "Detective DeMarco reporting for duty, sir." He pointed to a desk in the corner. "That's your spot. The guy in the adjoining desk is your partner. Say hi, get settled. You have any questions, ask one of the other detectives. There should be a stack of open cases on your desk. You might as well get started." "Yes, sir." Obviously, this was a sink-or-swim kind of place. The man seated at the desk linked to mine wore a baseball cap. He had his head down, searching the bottom drawer for something. I looked around uncertainly. At least I wasn't the only female detective in the unit. That was something. I put my bag down, removed my nameplate, a few office supplies, and took a seat in my chair. "Hi, I'm Liv DeMarco," I said. "I believe I'm your new partner." The man slammed the bottom drawer. "It took you long enough to get here?" "Excuse me?" "You're late. Didn't anyone ever tell you how important first impressions are?" He slid his nameplate to face me, and I stared at it. Detective B. Fennel. I'd been staring at that nameplate every day for the last 2 years. He took the cap off, and my jaw dropped. "What the hell are you doing here?" Brad grinned. "You never listen. I go where you go." "You can't be here." "Why not?" "They never transfer partners. Teams don't get to stay together. You know that." "So you transferred out of intelligence to get away from me?" "No." I lowered my voice and glanced around. "No," I repeated. "Okay, so we're good." He slid a folder closer to me. "I think we should start with this one. It's cold, but it'll give us a chance to dip our toes in the water." "You don't like bodies." No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't wrap my mind around this. Maybe I was dreaming. If they're already dead when I get to them, then I don't have to feel guilty about not saving them. My therapist thinks this might work out better. It'll be less of a trigger. "Okay." When I continued to stare at him, Brad snapped his fingers in front of my face. He glanced around and leaned closer. "Liv, you're a DeMarco. Even though you're not willing to exploit that fact, I am, and so is Captain Grayson. The department made an exception for us. That last case earned me some major brownie points too, and I'm not complaining. So stop making a spectacle and let's get to work. You're embarrassing me." My dad did this. Vince called, asked if I had any interest in changing units, and pulled some strings. Apparently, Grayson told him we make a good team and you were going to miss me. Obviously, the commissioner agreed. He grinned. "Don't make me regret this." "I won't." I smiled. "I promise." This has been Unforeseen Danger, a Detective Liv DeMarco thriller. Written by g.k.parks. Read by L.W. Salinas. Copyright 2019 by g.k.parks. Production copyright 2020 by g.k.parks.